Hey, what's going on, fam? So this is another video. I'm gonna try to keep this fairly short. I know I say that in before every video, and then some of them end up not being short. But I'm really gonna try to keep this short because I have some other videos I'm gonna be uploading in the next couple of days too. But this video in particular, I want to address what I call the Pan-African Bird Box Challenge. And the reason why I'm calling it that is because of the fact that, well, first let me back up a little bit. So I know I said, number one, that I was not going to further address these Pan-Africans after that last video I did, the Bill Wakanda video. But they're doing too many things that weren't being addressed, whether it's making false accusations against me based on false information directly, making direct accusations about me, or just being a Democrat operative. You're basically just a Democrat, but you're out here calling yourself a Pan-Africanist. There's too many things that they aren't addressing or that they're doing themselves that needs to be called out. And in particular, with the Democrat operator I'm referring to, I'm going to make another video about him, but the people who I at one time thought were real Pan-Africans are not calling him out, have not called him out already. He's clearly been operating as a Democrat operative for a while calling himself a Pan-Africanist or a representative of reparations movements, of quote-unquote genuine Pan-African reparations movements. He's not being called out by the so-called real Pan-Africans. So it looks like it's on me or on us ADOS. So we're going to do it, but I'm not going to, try to mix in too many topics in one video. So this video is going to be the Pan-African Bird Box Challenge. And the reason why I'm calling it that is because basically what's happening is Pan-Africans claim to be so against ADOS and so focused on ADOS and putting all their energy into defeating ADOS and making it go away, based on the fact that they claim that it's against black unity, it's against global unity, it's counter to Pan-Africanism, and Pan-Africanism is supposedly, allegedly, the only way to black liberation, so it's against that. All the things of which are not true. ADOS is not necessarily has to be against Pan-Africanism. It can work in conjunction with Pan-Africans if they would get off their egos. But let's just go with that for now. Let's go with that. It's allegedly, it's ADOS's anti-black unity, anti-global black unity, and that's their main reason for being against it. But whenever you have immigrants, whether they're first, second, third generation immigrants, saying vile things about ADOS people, and I'm talking about ADOS by blood, not necessarily the movement, ADOS by blood, that's very harmful to black unity. Especially when you're basing these negative and vile things based on white supremacist stereotypes about African Americans in particular. That's very harmful to black unity. When you're saying things like basically we, long story short, shouldn't get too linked up or too mingled with those people, that's against black unity. So you would think if these Pan-Africans are so hyper-focused on anything that stops black unity, and it's not necessarily ADOS, but because ADOS falls under that category or that umbrella of being against black unity, that's why they're against it. You would think they would also be against other things that hinder or against black unity, but they aren't. Now, the best they'll do is when you confront them with the things that these African or Caribbean immigrants are saying, they'll minimize it to only a few, or they'll give some fake lip service to being against it, but only after you've confronted them about not being against it. And what do I mean? I mean, when these Pan-Africans, well, for one example, when these Pan-Africans come against us or not us, because I don't really do it, but other ADOS for taking some pride in the flag, or putting the flag on their social media profiles or anything like that, these Pan-Africans get all up in arms. And even though some of that I understand what it's based on, some of that about the imperialism and the white supremacy that the American flag represents, I do get some of that. I mean, some of those reasons are why Colin Kaepernick knelt for the national anthem, which I agree with, and I still support Colin Kaepernick for doing that. But at the same time, I understand why ADOS are using the American flag And I'll probably go in a little bit more depth into that in another video, but I understand why they're using it, and I'm not necessarily against that either. But these Pan-Africans claim that they're against the flag because of XYZ, colonialism, white supremacy, blah, blah, blah. And they ignore the fact that a lot of ADOS tell them it's not about that. It's just about showing our pride and our heritage, where we're from. And one of the things that immigrants, like I said, whether they're first, second, or third generation, are notorious for are propping up their flags and flying their flags, whether it's on social media or it's you see them driving in their car, you'll see their license plate, or you'll see a windshield decal or rear view. I don't know what the rear view windshield is called, but they'll see a decal on that. So, or you'll go to their house and they'll have a flag in their house, or they'll have a flag hanging off their porch, just like someone who's a quote-unquote patriot or an American. And my problem with this is that these African flags basically have the same symbolism that the American flag has. They're flags of white countries. And don't tell me that they're black countries now, because you same Pan-Africans who, when I confronted you about the fact that you can't name one single African or Caribbean country that has a legitimate repatriation program or a legitimate refuge program for African Americans, they admitted to me that all these countries are essentially white countries. That's not my words. I got those words from Pan-Africans. So I don't want to hear no backtracking now about how that's a black country or how their flag means something different. Because when I confronted you about repatriation, you told me it was a white country. You tell me that these countries have borders drawn by white Europeans, which is true. And you tell me that that makes it not really an African country. Y'all told me this directly. Too many of y'all, not even just one, too many of y'all have told me directly that it's not really an African country. These are countries that the borders were drawn by white people. These are countries that were and are still colonized and controlled by white people. That's your other excuse. The governments are controlled by Europeans. So these are essentially white governments with black faces. And a lot of these flags were designed by white people. But whether they're designed by white people or Africans, all the other things I said about the borders and the way the governments ran, all that's still white. And these people are flying these flags as a way, especially in America, as a way to distinguish themselves from the natives there. And whether it's just pride in where they're from, or a way to distinguish themselves from the natives of America, you're okay with it. And so when ADOS give you the same reasons, it's not just pride in white supremacy or pride in the U.S. flag and the things that have happened to black people under the U.S. flag. It's just being proud of where you're from and where you're living and your heritage and where your ancestors are from. Just like a lot of these people suffered a lot of injustice under these other flags, but they still fly them. And they continue to suffer injustice under those flags. That's why they're leaving those countries to come to America. But you're not saying anything about them. And the reason why I'm pointing these things out is because this is how it ties into the Bird Box Challenge. These Pan-Africans never call them out for flying their flags, never call them out for the anti-ADOS statements, never call them out for any of those things that are essentially the same thing that they accuse ADOS. It's a false accusation, but let's pretend that it's real for purposes of this video. The same thing that they say ADOS are doing, you have Pan-Africans doing in this. I mean, not Pan-Africans, but Africans, whether they're Caribbean Africans or African Africans, doing the same things, and they're not even a movement. They don't even have any political agenda behind what, at least ADOS have a political agenda behind what we're doing. These people don't even have a political agenda behind what they're doing. This is just their culture. This is just who they are. And it's always crickets from these same dudes who have 6 and 7 YouTube videos, 4 and 5 different articles on Medium about ADOS because it's such a horrible anti-black unity movement. But you don't have one, or if you do, you have one video or article addressing this kind of behavior from immigrants. If ADOS requires 6 and 7 videos and 4 and 5 articles So do these immigrants. And if they don't, you're exposing yourself as a hypocrite clout chaser. You're not really against anti-black unity. You're just against ADOS because it's making you as a Pan-African irrelevant. And just to further back up what I'm saying about the anti-ADOS statements and the anti-ADOS sentiments against us that are coming from Africans and Caribbeans, I want to read this tweet. So right now I'm reading a tweet from a sister named Essie, underscore Essie underscore N. And that's underscore SEESSIE underscore N. And the first underscore looks like it's 2 underscores because it's a longer underscore than the first one. But whatever, that's her name. Now let me read her tweet. I completely get what you mean, but I also get why some folk are offended. It's like me trying to explain what to an AA, which stands for African American. It's like me trying to explain to an AA why African parents don't want us marrying them. There's no way to make it less offensive even if I try. Or there's no way to make it sound less offensive even if I try. Now let's stop and reanalyze that tweet. Or let's stop and analyze that tweet. Now let me reread a line from that tweet. It's like me trying to explain to an AA why African parents don't want us marrying them. That particular statement in that tweet, because I know what one of the rebuttals will be, oh, that's just her parents, that's not all Africans, that's not even the majority, that's just her and her parents, that's rare, we can't use that to categorize all Africans. She did not say, my parents told me not to marry an African American. She said African parents, as in general African parents. She did not say my African parents. She said African parents. That's it. Trying to explain to an AA why African parents. So she's speaking about African parents in general. Don't want us marrying them. She's speaking to the culture of Africans in America. And I'm not talking about African Americans. I'm talking about born on the soil of African Americans. Born on the soil of Africa who are now in America, where they were directly born in Africa themselves, or they're second or third generation from someone who was born on the soil of Africa. That's the community that's the perspective that she's speaking from. And who better to believe or to take that kind of testimony from than someone who is descendants or direct of people who were born in Africa, or directly themselves descended from Africa. Who better? And I know, like I said in my first video, the Pan-Africanism versus ADOS movement, don't give me that this is just social media and this is not real life. Because like I've already spoken to in previous videos, social media allows people to be more honest in a lot of cases, not less honest. Yes, there's some clout chasing and fronting and lying on social media. Yes, there's a lot of that. But in general, especially on political statements and things like that, people are not lying about how they feel. If anything, they're being more real. On controversial topics, people tend to be more honest than they can be in real life, because you're on social media, whether you're anonymous or not, you're more insulated from the backlash of your controversial statements when you're not saying it in people's faces. It allows a lot more honesty. So don't sit up here, even me. The reason why I stay partly anonymous on social media is because I'm not protected. I know if I get out here and I'm putting myself out here on a limb with no support and no income that's coming from black people, I'm stuck. If I lose my job, none of these pro-black Negroes on the internet are going to support me. None of them are going to make sure I can still pay my rent and feed myself. So that's why I stay anonymous. And it's okay to be anonymous, especially when we don't have enough support for people who are not being anonymous. There's few people out here every now and then who can be full-throated for black people and not have to worry about the backlash they may receive from white society for being fully in support of black people. So again, I don't want to hear this is just social media. But again, who better to testify to the feelings of Africans than someone who's one of them? And again, I'm not referring to, because I know these Pan-Africans, oh, we're all African. No, I'm referring to people who are born on the soil of Africa, or only 2 or 3 generations removed, maybe 4 at the most removed from someone who was born on the soil of Africa. This is what they're saying about us. This is the kind of things that I already knew, even when I did consider myself a Pan-African. I already knew Latinos and Asians and other Arabs were telling their children these things about black people. I already knew that they were doing it, and that's why I wasn't caping even for them when I was a so-called Pan-African. I was only African people that I would cape for, because I knew this kind of culture among non-black people, whether they're white, Asian, or otherwise, whatever they are. If they're not black, I knew that this kind of mentality was coming from them. What I did not know was that this mentality, even though I knew about some of the other vile things that they would say about us, which is one of the main reasons why I went towards ADOS and away from Pan-Africanism. I didn't know that it was going this deep, but I should have expected it based off the other things I've seen them say. And like I said, whether it's in real life or on the internet. For example, if we talk about racism in America, one of the main people that will tell us that racism isn't that big a deal, that racism isn't really affecting us, are immigrants. Now, is this to say that there are no ADOS that say these kind of stupid things about racism? No, there's plenty. But in general, and most of you guys know this, if you had to pick, if you were in a room of black people and you had to pick, and you were talking about racism, and you had to pick which person is going to be most likely to minimize racism and tell black people that they're lazy. Is it going to be an immigrant or an ADOS? 9 times out of 10, it's a lot more likely that it's going to be an immigrant that says this about black people. Oh, I came from XYZ country. I know real poverty. You African Americans are lazy. I came here with nothing, and I worked hard, and I was a dishwasher. I was XYZ. And I saved my money, and now I have a good job and a nice car and a big house. And any African American who can't get that for themselves, they're just lazy. People from my culture, we understand XYZ. We don't have kids out of wedlock. Who's more likely to say that? An African American or an immigrant? We all know it's an immigrant. So these are the kind of things that we already knew, whether this is the stuff that I've seen on social media or the stuff that we see in real life. We know who is most likely to have these sentiments and these feelings towards the struggle against racism in America. It's an immigrant. So with that being said, with this kind of pervasive culture among Africans, why aren't Pan-Africans talking about this? Why aren't Pan-Africans making 6 and 7 videos about this? Checking immigrants for their anti-ADOS sentiments, checking immigrants for their anti-ADOS statements, checking immigrants for their pro-white supremacy statements by minimizing the struggle of African Americans and telling us that we're lazy, using these white supremacist stereotypes and tropes against us to undermine our struggle against racism and say it ain't all that bad. Why aren't they giving the same energy to them? And just to further drive my point home, when I read that tweet, the sister started out saying, I completely get what you mean. She's responding to a tweet from another person who's descended from immigrants. She's descended from Caribbean immigrants, talking about black Americans are bottom tier when it comes to black men for me. And I say that because I like a man with some type of cultural background other than just being black, like Jamaican, Bahamian, Congolese, British. She said British, etc. Love all of y'all though. And then this sister responds, but I completely get what you mean. That's why our African parents don't want us to marry African Americans either. So this is whether they're Caribbean immigrants or African immigrants. Whenever you have these quote unquote diaspora wars, which happen like once every couple of months on Twitter, where it's African Americans versus Caribbeans and Africans. They call it diaspora wars, but it's always Caribbeans and Africans teaming up against African Americans, spreading these white supremacist tropes and stereotypes about African Americans. This sister, this one of them is two black women. One of them saying that's why their parents tell them not to marry us, and then the other one saying that we're bottom tier because we have no culture. And when you look deeper at that statement, even though she's a woman, so she's trying to single out men, that doesn't just apply to men. If your basis is because we have no culture, that applies to ADOS women too, because they're the same as us. They're black Americans, and you're coming with these racist stereotypes about how we have no culture other than just being black. And you don't see these Pan-Africans speaking out on this. The only time you catch them speaking out on it is when you call them out for it. Then they'll lie and claim that they've been against it all this time, but they're not putting in the same level of energy that they're putting into ADOS. And this is these people culture. ADOS people had to sit down, study data, and come up with the stuff, and come up with ADOS. It was people, Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore, they used data to come up with the ADOS movement. They didn't just come up with it because they don't like Africans or because they don't like Caribbeans. But Caribbeans, they come up with this stuff basically because they just don't like ADOS. There's no study involved with this stuff. Because if they had studied it, they would realize this stuff isn't true and it's due to white supremacy. So there's no studies, there's no data backing the stuff that they're saying about African Americans. It's just feelings and culture. But you don't see these Pan-Africans coming at these immigrants with the same energy that they're coming at us with, because they're in the bird box. It's the bird box challenge that they're playing in. When we get called Akata, when we get denigrated, when we get disrespected by people who we've made the way for them to come over here, these Pan-Africans are in the bird box because a lot of them are immigrants themselves. But whether they're immigrants or they're ADOS by blood, they're in the bird box for these immigrants. But when it comes to us, they're all on our necks. But even that, like I said, some of them are immigrants, but then a lot of them are also ADOS. So that just further proves that the burden of Pan-Africanism is all on African Americans, because half these Pan-Africans are ADOS. And they don't ever put the same pressure on these immigrants for working against black unity that they put on ADOS. They don't ever put this energy on the African immigrants and the Caribbean immigrants, because it's all about clout chasing. ADOS has momentum. ADOS is making politicians make statements about reparations that they haven't made in ever. Even if it's fake support, at least they have to do that. At least they can't just outright say no, which is what they have been doing for decades. They had basically never come out. There has never been a political campaign outside of Green Party campaigns, which they can't even get on debate stages, that has been talking about reparations in any kind of serious way. Before, it was just no. So because of this momentum that ADOS has produced, these Pan-Africans who are irrelevant because they're pontificators, they're book clubbers, they participate in sloganism and babble. They're mad because their inaction, their irrelevance, or their inaction has made them now irrelevant. And ADOS is a constant reminder at how irrelevant that they have become. And that's why they are chasing down ADOS and ADOS exclusively. Because if they weren't clout chasing, they would be on the necks of these immigrants the same way they are on the necks of ADOS. And like I said, don't give me this. I know people want to say, like I said, it's just her. Let's just say, or let's say, in my bag. So no, what people will say is, oh, well, that's just her saying that they only want to date other Africans. it's not something necessarily against African Americans, but it's not. We all know that African parents are not telling their African children not to marry white people, not to marry Latinos, not to marry Asians. It's only African Americans that they're telling them not to marry. And even if they were telling them not to marry other groups, that's basically what ADOS is. Not in the terms of who you should marry, but in the terms of who we need to look out for a justice claim for. It's just our group first. So if this was genuinely something where it's not really about not dating other African Americans, it's just about not dating anybody that's not from her tribe or not from her country, then that's ADOS basically. But you still got a problem with ADOS saying that we're going to look out for the justice claim of American descendants of slaves, but you don't have a problem with people saying we're just going to marry within our tribe. We're just going to marry within our nation. But it's not that. I'm just giving every benefit of the doubt that can possibly be given to this sister. Even if that was the case, that it's not about not marrying African Americans, it's more so about only marrying within your tribe or country, that's what ADOS is. At best, if that's what she meant, that's what ADOS is. At worst, it's what it sounds like. Just don't marry them American Negroes. Marry a white man, marry an Asian man, marry a Latino man. Just don't marry them American Negroes. That's really what it is. But like I said, even if it was a situation where I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt, where it's everybody and not just ADOS that her people won't marry, that's still the same thing as ADOS. And that still exposes the hypocrisy of the Pan-Africans, because they're attacking ADOS for looking out for their tribe first, their people first, but they don't have this problem with these people who have this pervasive culture. They come to America, into our country, and still have this attitude. But anyway, fam, like I said, I just wanted to expose this hypocrisy, this bird box challenge that these Pan-Africans are in, because every time ADOS say something about these immigrants, they're all on our necks. We're anti-immigrant, we're anti-African. But they don't have nothing to say about these anti-African American sentiments coming from African and Caribbean immigrants. These white supremacist based stereotypes that we have no culture, that we're lazy, don't marry us. But anyway, fam, that's another video. Like, share, subscribe. Peace.